The man in this photograph is John Emil List. A church deacon. An accountant. A father of 3. In November 1971, he erased his entire family, and then vanished without a trace. For 18 years. Until an artist's hands found him again. This is the full story. December 7, 1971. Westfield, New Jersey. 2 police officers climbed through a window of a 19-room Victorian mansion. The house has been silent for weeks, but every single light is burning. Their breath fogs in the freezing air. And somewhere in the dark, music is playing. It's hymns. Religious music, drifting through an intercom system into empty rooms. The officers follow their flashlights down a long hallway, past furniture draped in shadow, toward a pair of doors at the back of the house. Behind those doors lies a ballroom. And what they find inside will haunt this town for half a century. 4 figures, laid side by side on sleeping bags, beneath a stained glass skylight. A mother upstairs. A 5-page letter on a desk. And the man who wrote it, the quiet accountant who taught Sunday school, has simply ceased to exist. This is the story of John List. The perfect father who erased his family, and then erased himself. For 18 years. To understand how a man disappears in plain sight, you first have to understand where it happened. Westfield, New Jersey. 1971. A wealthy commuter town, less than an hour from Manhattan. Tree-lined streets, station wagons in the driveways, good schools. The kind of place people move to precisely because nothing ever happens there. On Hillside Avenue, one house stood above them all. The locals called it Breeze Knoll. A 19-room mansion built at the turn of the century, crowned with a ballroom, and a stained glass skylight said to have come from the Tiffany Studios, worth a small fortune on its own. The family inside seemed built to match. John Emil List, 46 years old. An accountant. A World War II veteran. A devout Lutheran who taught Sunday school every single week. No alcohol. No cigarettes. Neighbors said they never once heard the man swear. He lived there with his wife Helen, 46. His mother Alma, 84, who kept a small apartment on the 3rd floor. And 3 teenagers. Patricia, 16. John Jr., 15. Frederick, 13. 6 people. One perfect American family. On the surface. John List's life had been drawn with a ruler. The only child of strict German immigrants, he was raised on 2 ideas, duty and faith. He studied accounting, served in the war, and came home to climb the corporate ladder. But colleagues remembered a man who was brilliant with numbers and hopeless with people. Rigid. Humorless. Incapable of small talk. He kept being promoted, and kept being let go. In 1951, he married Helen Taylor, a young widow whose first husband had died in the Korean War. But Helen carried a secret into the marriage, an illness from her first husband, incurable at the time, and so heavily stigmatized that she hid it from everyone. Including the man she was marrying. Over the years, the disease and the shame took their toll. Helen's health declined. She rarely left the house. She drank. And in her worst moments, she would compare John to her first husband, the war hero, and tell him exactly how far short he fell. In 1965, at the peak of his career as a bank vice president, John bought Breeze Knoll. It was a house he could not afford. His mother sold her home in Michigan and moved into the 3rd floor to help pay for it. And most of those 19 rooms? They stayed empty. The family could not afford furniture. Then, in 1971, the ladder finally broke. John lost his job at the bank. For a man whose entire identity was duty and appearances, this was unspeakable. Literally. He told no one. Not his wife. Not his mother. Not his children. Instead, every morning, John List put on his suit, picked up his briefcase, kissed his family goodbye, and drove to the Westfield train station. There, he sat on a bench, reading newspapers, until 5 o'clock. Then he drove home for dinner. He did this for months. And while he sat there, the mortgage payment stopped, and he began quietly draining his mother's savings. At its peak, his salary had been around $25,000 a year, nearly $200,000 in today's money. Now, there was nothing left. And inside that silent commuter's head, a terrifying accounting was underway. In his eyes, his family was sliding toward spiritual ruin. His wife had turned from the church. His daughter Patricia dreamed of being an actress, she had started smoking, and dabbling in things her father considered close to witchcraft. Debt on one side. Damnation on the other. And John List found a third column. If his family died now, while their souls were still clean, they would go to heaven. And he alone would carry the sin. Tuesday, November 9, 1971. An ordinary school morning at Breeze Knoll. Breakfast. Backpacks. The children left one by one. None of them noticed anything unusual. Why would they? Nothing ever happened in Westfield. When the house was quiet, John went to work. We won't describe what happened. By mid-morning, Helen was gone. Then Alma, upstairs on the 3rd floor. And the house on Hillside Avenue stood silent. And here is the detail that investigators could never forget. When it was done, John List walked to the kitchen, and made himself lunch. He ate it right there, in that house. Then he drove to the bank and closed the last accounts. He mailed letters to the children's schools, explaining the family would be visiting a sick grandmother in North Carolina. He stopped the mail. The milk. The newspaper. Line by line, the accountant was closing the books on his own family. That afternoon, 16-year-old Patricia came home from school. Then 13-year-old Frederick. Neither of them made it past the front hall. One child remained. 15-year-old John Jr. had a soccer game that afternoon. And his father did something that no criminologist has ever fully explained. He drove to the field. He stood on the sideline. He watched the entire game, witnesses remember him cheering. Then he drove his son home. The boy was the only one who saw it coming. And the only one who fought. That night, John arranged his wife and 3 children side by side on sleeping bags in the ballroom, beneath the stained glass skylight. His mother remained upstairs. In the letter, he would explain she was simply too heavy to move. He turned the thermostat down. The lights, on. He tuned the intercom radio to a religious station. Then he walked through the house with a pair of scissors, and cut his own face out of every family photograph. On the desk, he left a 5-page confession addressed to his pastor. It ended with the words, "At least I'm certain they've all gone to heaven." Then John List turned off the light in his study, and walked out of his own life. For days, then weeks, the mansion glowed. Neighbors noticed the lights burning around the clock. But the story about North Carolina had spread, and in a town like Westfield, nobody wants to be the paranoid one. So the house burned bright, night after night. Like a lantern with nobody home. One by one, the bulbs began to die. The mansion dimmed, window by window, like something slowly going out. And one person could not shake a bad feeling. Patricia's drama teacher. His most devoted student had missed rehearsal after rehearsal. And he kept remembering something she had told him only weeks before she vanished. She said she was afraid of her father. She said she had a feeling that he was going to kill them all. At the time, he had dismissed it as a teenager's imagination. Now, on December 7th, nearly a month after the family disappeared, he and a worried neighbor finally called the police. The officers found the house freezing cold. Hymns still playing on the intercom. In the ballroom, under the skylight, lay Helen, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. Alma was upstairs on the third floor. And on the desk of the study lay the confession, signed, John Emil List. The police didn't need to hunt for a suspect. He had signed his name to everything. There was only one question left. And it would take 18 years to answer. Where was John List? The story detonated across America. A Sunday school teacher had methodically ended his entire family, and vanished into thin air. Days later, his car turned up in the long-term parking lot at JFK Airport, New York. Every sign pointed overseas. Interpol joined the hunt. But there was no passport. No flight record. No trail at all. The car at the airport was one final piece of bookkeeping, a false entry, left for the investigators. John List never boarded a plane. He had quietly taken a train west, into the middle of the country. 9 months later, Breeze Knoll itself burned to the ground in an arson that was never solved. The Tiffany skylight melted in the flames. It was as if the town's most beautiful house, and everything that had happened inside it, was being erased from the map. The years rolled by. Tips came in from Florida. From Canada. There were rumors he had taken his own life in some forest, and simply never been found. Every lead evaporated. The FBI's wanted poster still carried a photograph from the 60s, growing more useless with every birthday. Detectives retired, and passed the file to younger men with the same quiet instruction, don't let this one go. Some of them privately admitted the truth. If John List was still alive, he had one. So where was he? The answer, when it finally came, was almost insulting. He hadn't fled to South America. He hadn't changed his face. He had taken a bus to Denver, Colorado. And simply, continued. There, a quiet man named Robert Clark, a name borrowed from an old college classmate, found work as a night cook. And later, as an accountant. He joined the Lutheran church. He showed up early, left late, and never missed a Sunday. The chilling part is how little he changed. Same profession. Same gray suits. Same rigid punctuality. Neighbors trusted Bob Clark to do their taxes. He wasn't hiding from his old life. He was rebuilding it. Brick by brick. As if the ballroom in New Jersey had never existed. At that church, he met a woman named Dolores. In 1985, 14 years after Westfield, Bob Clark remarried. His new wife knew nothing. She only knew the kindest, most dependable man she had ever met. She had no idea that the man beside her had had another wife. 3 other children. Another mother. In 1988, the Clarks moved again, to a suburb of Richmond, Virginia. A small house. A steady job. The American dream. Second edition. But fate had already planted its seed. Back in Denver, a neighbor named Wanda had once stumbled on an old tabloid story about the List murders. She stared at the photograph. Then at the house next door. And told her family, that looks exactly like Bob Clark. She even showed the article to Dolores herself. Everyone laughed it off. Bob Clark? The tax man from church? Impossible. The article went into the trash. And the secret survived. For a few more years. By 1989, a television program was rewriting the rules of American crime fighting. America's Most Wanted, watched by tens of millions every week. For the 18th anniversary of the Westfield murders, the producers decided to reopen the list file. And they hit an immediate wall. Their only photograph was 2 decades old. Hunting a man with no current face is like hunting a ghost. So they hired a ghost maker. Frank Bender was a forensic sculptor. An artist who worked with the dead. Together with a criminal profiler, he attempted something that had never been done on television, aging a fugitive's face, in clay. They studied List's bone structure. His mother's photographs. His psychology. The genius was in the details. A rigid, vain, God-fearing man like List, Bender reasoned, would never wear fashionable frames. He would choose thick, conservative, old man's glasses. Bender bought a pair at a second-hand shop, and set them on the sculpture. On May 21, 1989, the clay head of a 64-year-old John List appeared on national television. 1,000 miles away, in Denver, Wanda was watching. She nearly stopped breathing. The face on the screen, the heavy jowls, the receding hair, the thick glasses, was the man who used to live next door. This time, nobody laughed. Her family called the hotline with a name, and a location. Bob Clark. Richmond, Virginia. 11 days after the broadcast, FBI agents walked into a small accounting office in Richmond. Behind a desk of tax files sat a quiet man in thick glasses. He denied everything. Calm as a ledger. "My name is Robert Clark. You have the wrong man." He was still saying it when they took his fingerprints. Prints that matched a World War II military record. And a surgical scar, behind his right ear. 18 years of running ended not with a gunshot, but with an artist's hands. In April, 1990, John Emil List, now 64 years old, finally faced a jury in New Jersey. His defense argued diminished capacity. A man crushed by financial pressure, they said, who broke under the weight. List himself claimed he had acted out of love. He was sending his family to heaven. The prosecution needed only one question to tear that apart. If they all had to be saved, why didn't you go with them? His answer stunned the courtroom. Because suicide is a sin. It would have barred him from heaven. And from ever reuniting with the family he killed. He had calculated his own salvation as precisely as any balance sheet. The 5-page confession, written calmly at the scene, buried the insanity defense. On April 12, 1990, the jury convicted John List on 5 counts of first-degree murder. 5 consecutive life sentences. The judge told the court that John List was a man without honor. And that he should never walk free again. He never did. In a rare television interview years later, an old man in prison was asked if he had any regrets. He answered in a flat, even voice of an accountant. He believed his family was in heaven. And he hoped, one day, to join them. On March 21, 2008, John List died in prison custody. He was 82. No one claimed his body. Helen, Patricia, John Jr. and Frederick were buried together at Fairview Cemetery. In Westfield. The town that was supposed to be the safest place in America. Alma was taken home to Michigan. On the empty lot where Breeze Knoll once stood, a new house eventually rose. The lawn is neat. The street is quiet. Only the old-timers glance over as they pass. Frank Bender's clay head became one of the most famous objects in forensic history, and helped launch an entire discipline where art hunts criminals. Hollywood borrowed the story too. The 1987 horror film The Stepfather was inspired by this very case. In the end, the List case leaves one lesson. And it isn't about monsters. It's about masks. A man so terrified of admitting failure, that he chose annihilation over honesty. The tragedy didn't begin with a weapon. It began with silent breakfasts. A briefcase full of nothing. And a bench at a train station. But before you go, sit with this for a moment. John List cheered at his son's soccer game, just hours after what he had done. His neighbors waved at him, every day, for 18 years, and saw nothing. So here is my question for you. How well do you really know the quiet man next door? And if someone in your own home were hiding something behind a perfect smile, are you certain you would see it in time? Tell me what you think, down in the comments. And subscribe, because the next case is already waiting. Some fences are white. And some secrets never stay buried.